I was worried that I will have no agreement with Peter, but he just finished on a remark that I very much support, that the EU has been one of the most amazing projects in human history, because it brought these nations together that have fought against each other for centuries. But that brings me to my main proposition, which is exactly the opposite of what Peter stated at the beginning of this presentation, when you said that the crisis is not the crisis of the Eurozone. I suggest to you that indeed Europe is experiencing the crisis caused by the introduction of the single currency, the euro, and that my question, and the question we should be asking is, can the project of European unity survive, rather than whether the euro itself can, whether the euro can survive? Because I suggest to you that European unity can only survive if that failed project is abandoned. I fear, however, that it might be already too late to do so, because so much hostility has already been generated amongst the nations of Europe, and so much economic damage has been caused by this project. Now, Peter, you mentioned that you attended a conference at which someone predicted that Spain would leave the Eurozone last year, right? And the prediction obviously failed. Well, I put to you that whoever made that prediction was right. It was just right too early. Because it would have been in the interest of Spain and the people of Spain to have left the Eurozone, because that is the only chance they have to regain competitiveness and to regain control over their massive unemployment levels. When you have youth unemployment levels higher than 50% and no prospect of economic growth, you cannot govern a country democratically for years, right? That's simply not an option. So if Spain and Europe is to have a hope, then that prediction should have been proven right, you know? That reminds me of another kind of gathering that I attended in Porto, in Portugal, in 2010. That was still the crisis in its early stage. And this was an academic conference organized for specialists in EU studies. Hardly anyone spoke about the crisis. And in fact, there was a big celebration of a book launch in which the first decade of the euro was celebrated. And the authors of that book, and one of them was present, he was a former bureaucrat working for the European Central Bank, celebrated the euro, and he argued that they proved the British Eurosceptics wrong, that the euro was a success story. And there were many officials, including President Barroso, stating it in 2010, 2011, that the euro has been a remarkable success. Well, I don't think that people would still say that. If they do, they really live in alternative universe, which Brussels at times can become. If you visited Brussels or any of the official buildings, you would know what I'm talking about. I would say so. Now, I want to go to the very last slide, if I can. I don't know how to do it. No, don't worry. You posed the question, can, well, the first question on the slide, I wanted to address that. Is it possible to, or you have the remote? You have me under control there. Just the very last slide, if that's possible. I'll just go back.
What about 26?
No, the very last one. The very last one. Where you raised those questions. Yes. Can the EU step back? Does it really want to? You see, the problem is, it shouldn't be about the EU. Who is the EU who is to step back? You also mentioned that the EU is not selling, hasn't been selling its gold. The EU doesn't have any gold. The EU doesn't even have the right to tax the European people. The EU budget is the equivalent of 1% or so of the overall GDP. You know, the nations of Europe have gold. The European Central Bank is constituted by the central banks of the constituted nations. And there is a remarkable little, perhaps bit of trivia that might prove not all that trivial. When you look at the Australian today, there is a report about the German central bank, the Deutsche Bundesbank, relocating its gold reserves. You see, Germany kept its gold outside of Germany, understandably so, because during the Cold War, they were far too close to Eastern Europe. So they keep their gold reserves in New York, in London, and in Paris. And they just decided, and it was officially announced, that they will move gold from Paris to Frankfurt. And that's quite interesting, remarkable, isn't it? So we are talking about a Europe of nation states, whether we like it or not. And I respect that people still have strong attachments to their nation states, right? So that's why I find it objectionable when Peter can speak in such cavalier mode about Liechtenstein and Monaco, and I have no attachments to these places. I've never been to them, and I find them strange. But you know, you have citizens of these countries who would probably defend their independence. So I would object to your suggestion that the taxation system should be changed. You cannot simply abolish countries. Mind you, this is exactly what the European federalist elites attempted to do about 20 years ago. And this is the catastrophe that is the project of the single European currency, which was introduced roughly between 1989 and 92. This is the catastrophe of the single European currency, because it has failed. It has failed to deliver its key political and economic goals. I'll start with the political goals. The political goals were, and this was at the time when German unity became possible and then became implemented. From November 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down, November the 9th, to October the 3rd, when German unity became reality. Now the French, the British, the Italians, everyone was worried about Germany becoming all too powerful. What do we do? Right? Thatcher didn't want Germany to unify. The French had the brilliant idea that they followed well before the German unity became a realistic prospect. And that is, we can gain the ultimate control of Germany through binding them forever after in Europe through a common European currency, the single European currency. And so the euro was born. The German elites liked the idea too, because they've always been committed to Europe, right? And they convinced themselves and their people that the euro will be as strong, as dependable, as reliable as their beloved German mark used to be. That was the great bargain. That was meant to deliver a European Germany rather than a German Europe. Now fast forward 20 years, what do we have now? A German Europe emerging out of this mess that is the Eurozone crisis, right? Greece, with all respect to the country, and I love it, right? My first serious lover was Greece. And I visit the country. I love every bit of it. But Greece will never be Germany, neither should it be Germany, right? While it was outside the single currency, there was no need for Greece to become Germany. There was one revealing bit on your map of Europe and the levels of growth. I don't know whether anyone noticed, there are only a few bright spots, if you want, where there is still significant level of growth. They included Slovakia, which happens to be in the Eurozone, but also Romania and Bulgaria. Well, Romania and Bulgaria are certainly no less corrupt than Greece. They are not better governed than Greece. If anything, I'm afraid they are more corrupt and worse governed. But because they have their own currencies, they can maintain competitiveness. And their economy has been growing, and it's still predicted to grow. What's more, their problems are not Europe's problems or global problems. Greek problems, unfortunately, are Europe problems. And that is why Germany has no other way but to lead Europe. There is no way around it. Now, you pointed out correctly, right, that there are two moments and two different projects that Greece has been involved in. They entered the European, it was not even the Union then, that was created through the Treaty of Maastricht that also created the single currency. In 1981, Greece entered the European Economic Community. That was a project that worked remarkably well. That was the project that brought the nations of Europe closer together, because it allowed them to trade together without any restrictions, and it strengthened economic growth everywhere, and it was really a win-win proposition for everyone. It is when the European federalist elites believed that they should go further than that, when they embarked on the project of the single European currency, that started to undo those achievements of Europe. Yeah? Because when there was no single currency, the single market was accommodated much more diversity. Which brings me back to that diagram that you had there about the massive heterogeneity that we will find within the Eurozone countries. You pointed out correctly that the countries starting with the letter M do not share their commitment to the European Union. And that commitment is not trivial. All the members of the European Union signed up to the Treaty of Maastricht. This is how Germans have always seen the European Union, and scholars of European integration across Europe have seen the European Union as a very special, unique project. It is eine Rechtsgemeinschaft, a community of law. What keeps the nations of Europe together in that project that is the European Union is their commitment to a common European law. That is an amazing achievement. And this is also what explains German commitment to Europe. Germany's post-war reconstruction of democracy is based on twofold commitment. The commitment to Rechtsstaat, the rule of law, democracy, and the commitment to fiscal stability, the German mark, the beloved German mark. And in Europe, their commitment to Europe is basically the extension of that, because Europe is the Rechtsstaat writ large. Again, the political tragedy of the single currency is that that very accomplishment is being demolished. What rules? What treaties? What new treaties? When the existing treaties are routinely, cavalierly violated against. Now, Peter mentioned the fact that the European Central Bank was reluctant to buy Greek bonds, and that Germans opposed that policy. They oppose it because they fear inflation, fair enough. They believe that the inflation destroyed their Weimar democracy and led to Hitler. That is a belief that Germans have. It's probably even misguided in terms of the real history. But there's more to it. The Treaty of Maastricht that created the conditions for the single currency explicitly forbids the European Central Bank to take on that role. There is more to it still, because the European Central Bank was construed as a technocratic body. It is not staffed by politicians. Mario Monti is a former employee of Goldman Sachs, the very firm that helped Greece to falsify its statistics. He's a bureaucrat, an excellent bureaucrat, I suspect. But he shouldn't take on a political role that the European Central Bank is taking when it agrees to finance states. When the European Central Bank finances Greece, that means that someone will end up losing a lot of money. And that someone will be Germany, you see. This is where the political project of the single currency created economic conditions that really pull the nations of Europe apart from each other. Firstly, we have massive discrepancies in growth and economic prospects between Germany, that is doing amazingly well. As again Peter pointed out, they benefit from the low euro because of the troubles across the Eurozone. And then we have unemployment levels in Portugal, Spain, Greece, youth unemployment well above 50%. That is one aspect. But the other aspect is that whatever solution you adopt, there will be winners and losers. That's always the case, right? That is the drama of politics. But when you have winners and losers distributing along ethnic lines, you are asking for trouble. You are asking for trouble big time. I mean, in Nazi Germany, when the Nazis claimed that the Jews had too much money and too much control, it's very regrettable that some of it found resonance amongst the German population, because they They suffered an austerity regime in 1932 under Brünig, right? The chancellor of Germany then, who feared the repeat of inflation from the early 1920s. I mean, that is just a tangential digression towards the German trauma of inflation. What is occurring in Europe is that the solution that Greece, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Ireland need is, in fact, to allow the European Central Bank to have more relaxed monetary policies, to allow higher levels of inflation. The Germans need to be less panicky about inflation. You know, like, why should it be less than 3%? Why should it be around 2%? Maybe 5% is okay. You make losses when you have savings, but you have prospects of reducing unbelievably high unemployment levels in Greece, Spain, or Portugal. But you see, that proposition, that solution would be marginally beneficial to Greek, Italian, Spanish voters, but it will be definitely hugely unpopular in Germany, and it will cause massive material losses of German retirees and people in Germany who have savings. So this is a recipe for the increase in inter-ethnic, international conflict in Europe. So politically, the single European currency fell because it was meant to bring the nations of Europe together. It is pulling them apart. Economically, it fell because it was meant to bring the levels of prosperity of the participating members closer together, and it is pulling them apart, as we have seen on those statistics. And what scares me is that the European elites in the member states and in Brussels are not thinking about how to step back, not to the 19th century, step back to a European common market without a single currency, which is a very difficult proposition and a painful process to get there. Yeah? But the European politicians are not contemplating that. They believe that they need to continue in fair policies, and they argue that what is needed is more Europe. I think that argument is foolhardy. It is utterly misguided. The single currency would only work if the entire Eurozone becomes more German, which certainly won't appeal to Italians, Greeks, or Spaniards, or it will become more Italian, which certainly won't appeal to Germany. There is one remark I want to make to add a bit more detail to what we've discussed with respect to Greece. The Greek problems were mostly homemade. They became European problems because Greece was admitted into the single currency. But when you look at Ireland, when you look at Spain, Irish problems, and I lived in Ireland for 6 years, I lived there during the Celtic Tiger, Irish problems were largely made by the European Central Bank. It wasn't intended so, but the European Central Bank in the 2000s was worried about very sluggish growth or non-existent growth in two large member states, that was France and Germany, so the interest rates were very low, while Celtic Tiger was booming out of control. So the European Central Bank and the availability of cheap credit created wrong incentives for people in Ireland who had money, and they basically created the housing boom. What's worse, when the housing boom collapsed and the Irish banks were under serious threat, the European Central Bank, we know now, encouraged the Irish politicians, in fact, pressurized the Irish politicians to extend guarantees to their banks that were far too generous, and that brought down the Irish state. While I was there, I lived there for 5 years. Every year there was surplus, and never had a deficit, and their public debt was probably comparable to Australia's public debt, very, very low. But that single step to extend these guarantees to the bank brought down the Irish state. And the experience for the Irish people is utterly humiliating. Again, it's a tiny nation, but it's a proud nation, right? And I'm almost finished, and I should finish, because I talked about Ireland. So I'll finish by quoting an brilliant Irish writer who was very European actually, ended up living in Paris. I'm talking about Samuel Beckett, and he wrote in English and French about the perennial problem of our fragile predicament, and in him I find the solution to Europe, and that is fail, fail again, fail better.